Hello and welcome back to Paranormal NL. We're continuing on with episode 2. And here again, I have with me Mr. Henry Crane. He's a chair of the Tourism Belle Island and the treasurer of Radio Belle Island. And he's also on the town council. So, in the first portion of the episode, we discussed many different things on Belle Island, and we're going to continue our discussion here. We left off about discussing the mines. Now, Henry, we also talked about fairies. And how you had mentioned the queen of the fairies of all the different happenings on Belle Island maybe fuels this. And is it true that some people say that fairies live underground in mines?
I don't think that's overly true because the miners themselves, I don't think they wouldn't welcome the fairies in the mines. And there's again a large part, there's a part of folklore that deals with that. And you forgive me if the story is a bit long. The miners mined iron ore, okay, and they were down in the mines anywhere from 8 to 12 to 16 hours a day. Now, as a miner came up in the early days, he had no shower facilities, as I said there earlier. He had to come home and his wife would put a pan of water out in the porch for him, and he would wash in the first wash, and the second wash, third wash, and fourth wash, just to get his hands and face clean enough, and his clothes, and she'd give him clean clothes so he could sit and have his supper. Now, but there's another reason for it. As the mines moved into the 1950s, and I'll tell you about the number 4 mines. It had shower facilities. We had running water and bathtubs and all these things to go with it. And there was over almost 500 men working in number 4 mines. And as they came up from the mine, covered in the same muck and red iron ore, and all they could see was teeth and eyeballs, they wouldn't shower. They wouldn't get that muck off, and they were afraid to take the muck off because folklore has it that even though iron ore couldn't kill a fairy or the fairy queen, it would ward her off.
Okay.
She couldn't penetrate the iron ore, and so they would walk home covered in sweat and muck and red iron ore. They'd have that on them until they got home, and if they were lucky enough to have bathtubs, then they would bathe. If not, they still had to use the pan to wash off. But my father said he was a disbeliever, never once showered up in that showered home coming from number 4 mine. He just said, no, I'm used to doing this, I'm not going to do it. But he was as scared of the fairies and the fairy queen as most men were. She could approach you, but she couldn't do anything to you so long as you had that iron ore on you. As a matter of fact, there are some people today who, when they walk into the woods around here or over the fields for a picnic, there are some people who still keep little pieces of iron ore in their pocket because she can't penetrate the iron ore.
Now, there's some other stories, Henry, about salt being something that entities can't cross over, and also something about fairies and bread in your pockets. Can you talk to me about that?
Well, like I said, you can ward the fairies off by having red iron ore, because our iron ore is red. If you keep that on you, on your person, and whether it's in your shirt pocket or in your pants pocket or in your fist, then for whatever reason, it is the red iron ore that keeps the fairy queen and the fairies at bay. And don't drop it, and don't leave it alone until you're in your house. It's almost, in some cases, like when you're in the safety of your house, the fairies really can't enter it. It's almost like a vampire legend. You have to invite the vampire in, but if you keep the iron ore on you, that's the same thing. You keep the fairies out.
That's quite an interesting concept.
It is, and many people still believe it. And as a matter of fact, when we do a play based on what people have told us, we've had people that have come to the play and said, I feel a bit creepy, and we'll say, will you make sure that you keep your iron ore on you?
Are there still a lot of Belle Islanders that do that type of tradition?
Yep, and a lot of them won't admit it to you, but they do.
Yes? Wow.
Yep.
So a lot of these experiences are extremely intriguing. So do you have any of your own other experiences? I know you said there were a lot in the high school.
Yeah, I was, and if any Belle Islanders are listening or will listen, I grew up on a place called the Green. Bell is unique because it's only 3x9, but it was always divided into certain in sections. It's like it was the Green and the Valley, and West Mines is coach number 1, and the Front and the Ridge. It was divided into little pockets. But I grew up on the Green, in my grandmother's house, and that house was haunted. And as early as when I was 9 years old, my grandmother believed in all this. She would tell me, when she's telling me stories, well, this is so much BS, and this has its truth, and this is where it came from. So I clung to her every word. And I remember I was about 9 years old, and we were in her house, and she had the old fire going with the splits and the wood and the coal. And she'd make homemade bread, and we put the bread on top of the dampers, and it would burn and be with real nice taste. And she would have cocoa. So my grandfather had passed away some years prior to that, and one night I never paid much attention because Mom, I called her, wouldn't let me hang around the kitchen. You'd have to go to bed 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And so anyway, this night she said, I want to show you something. Now, she said, I don't want you to be afraid when it happens. I said, yeah, okay, good enough. Well, I wouldn't be afraid in the kitchen with her. So we had our cocoa and we had our toast, and it was about 10:30 in the evening. Now, she said, in another minute or two, maybe she says, as I say the words, the lights are going to come on, the light switch is going to pop up. And if the light switches in these days soft, but back in the old days, they turn out with a big click, right?
Right, yeah.
And out comes the light. I said, well, I said to Mom, that's a neat trick. That's pretty good. I said, how'd you do that? She said, I didn't do that. She said, that's your grandfather. I said, yeah. Go on, yeah. She said, don't be afraid. He's always in this house. And then she said, in about another 25 minutes or half hour, the light will click off again. So I couldn't wait. I couldn't believe it. I was having cocoa, and I was having toast, and we're making some more toast. And then it was about 5 to 11 the first time. Click, down goes the light. Oh, now I'm really, really desperate. How'd you do that? So anyway, she said, your grandfather would sit down with me, and we'd have our tea and our toast. And sometimes we had the home brew, maybe we'll have a glass of home brew. And she said, we'd be up for about half an hour, and then he'd go to bed. And the last thing he'd do would be turn off the light.
So he's telling you it's time to go to bed.
It's time to go to bed. And he'd turn off the light, and she'd say, we're going to bed now. So she said, no, she put me into the bed just off the master bedroom, or a bigger bedroom. And she took the big old pile of clothes, because we never had no central heating. Make sure a whole pile of clothes was around me, and I'd go to bed. And she said, don't be afraid what you saw. I said, I'm not. If you said it's a grandfather, I believe it. And she said, he won't hurt you. And she said, there are other things in this house, and I'll tell you now, he won't let them hurt you either. So, and I experienced that probably a dozen times or more over time. I couldn't get over it, but I was never afraid.
Henry, I've heard some people mention about the nuns on Bell Island. You made a little mention of them over by the high school. Now, there was another a building that actually burned down fairly recently. Was it?
Convent.
Yes. Can you tell me a little bit about that place?
Well, the convent was the place where the nuns stayed. And at one time it housed 25 nuns, because nuns were teaching, and we had we had about 5 smaller schools around, we call them primary elementary back in the day. And remember, there's 15,000 people. There was all kinds of large families, 6 and 8 kids. Sometimes if you had a family with only 4 children, people say, what's the matter with her? That's the way it was.
Yes, a lot of people had big families back then.
Oh, really big families. So like, I know families where there was 10 and 12 kids in it, right? Up around my area alone, there was about 65 kids. I can name them all. And you didn't have to go up more than 500 feet to get a team together for a road hockey or something. But the nuns were in the Immaculate Conception School. They were in the bigger Immaculate Conception School for the teenagers. There was a school in the East End, down at the front, up in Lance Cove, up West Mines, and there's nuns. And they weren't all nuns teaching, but all the nuns were teaching all the time, right?
Okay.
And it's been 2 or 3 years ago. But a lot of people, I was closed up for a while.
We're having some.
There was nuns. There was a guy who I know
The
very,
call
very well.
dropped a
Was a good
little
plumber.
bit just
Uh,
then, but we're back. Yeah, sorry, the cell phone dropped a little bit, but we're here still. Sorry, we were talking about nuns, and you were continuing about the nuns, and we mentioned about the
yeah,
covenant.
yeah. The nuns. I had a good friend of mine. He went out and they had fixed the furnace out there. And at that time, the convent had been sold and turned into a bed and breakfast. And so they were down fixing the furnace, and they sent his buddy out, go back to the truck and give me a couple of pieces of pipe. This is what I need. So he goes back and gets the pipe, and he comes back to his friend. He said, I thought all the nuns were gone. He said, they are. They've been gone for years. He said, three of them just went up the steps.
Go away.
Right? And he said, yeah, go on. He said, Janice, I'm not kidding.
I've stayed in that facility a few times, and it did give some different vibes.
Yep. Well, my daughter, when she was a teenager, worked out there, and she was one of the receptionists. When it was it wasn't a bed and breakfast, it was a hotel actually, and she was be the receptionist. And right next door, there was an old organ, an old electric organ. It didn't work anymore. But 4 or 5 times when she was out there, she said the organ, she could hear the organ music start to play.
Oh, she heard it.
Right. She heard it, and she went out, and she said I was looking right at the organ, and the organ was playing. Now she believes really wholeheartedly in this. She never got. She didn't feel like anything was going to happen to her, but she heard her organ music, and one day when she was checking a few people in, the organ started to play again. I mean, like, it's electric, it's not plugged in, it was broke anyway. Right? But the organ would play. And a good friend of mine who knew my son, he got married and spent his, said no, they got married. He went out there, and him and his wife stayed there, and he was saying about 1 o'clock in the morning, so he looked at the knob on the door shook a little bit, so they both looked at it, and here was the knob trying to turn. But he said he went over to it. He wants to know who's playing the game. So he jumped out of bed and goes over and unlocks the door and pulls the knob, pulls the door open, and looks up and down the corridor. There's nobody there. Right? And he said, Jesus. He said, no, nobody moves that fast. But he goes back to bed because this not your honeymoon night. Goes back in bed. They weren't settling in there, and bang, off it went again. And this time it was somebody was shaking the door trying to get it open. So he jumped out of bed and he looked at her. They said, yeah, we're gone.
Lots and lots of stories.
2:30 in the morning.
Definitely lots and lots of stories to share about Bell Island.
Oh my God, there's
really do appreciate.
This guy's not, he's not into the paranormal or anything else. He's just writing the shit right out of me. Right? He said, I'm not going back there again.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories that people have over the years and have experienced a lot of different things that would stand their hair up, that's for sure,
Yep.
Henry.
Yep.
So I really appreciate you talking with us and the Paranormal NL listeners today. And for people who want to hear the podcast, you can head on over to Paranormal NL on Spotify Audio. And you can also check us out on Paranormal NL on Facebook. Now, Henry, being that we did talk about the land, I'm going to do this, what Newfoundlanders would call ars formis. I'm going to give a Newfoundland land acknowledgement. Being that we talked about Bell Island, it's just a little blurb. We respectfully acknowledge the land on which we gather as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, whose culture has now been erased forever. We also acknowledge the land of Uktahunguk, which is Newfoundland, as the unceded traditional territory of the Beothuk and the Micmac. We also acknowledge Labrador as the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Innu, of the Nitassinan Inuit, of Nunatsiavut, and the Innu of Nutakavut. We recognize all First Peoples who were here before us, who live with us now, and the 7 generations to come. As First Peoples have done since time immemorial, we strive to be responsible towards the land and to respect the culture, ceremonies, and traditions of all who call it home. As we open our hearts and minds in the past, we commit ourselves to working in the spirit of truth and reconciliation to make a better future for all. So that hopefully will help with some of the heebie-jeebies of what we talked about with Bell
Yeah.
Island, because we don't want to send any bad juju out. So hopefully that'll help us a little bit. So Henry, thank you so much for talking with us today on
Not a
this
problem.
episode of Paranormal NL about Bell Island.
Okay, no sweat. I'll
Okay,
leave my
Bender.
joint.
Okay, thank you so much. Take care now.
Okay. Okay. Bye bye.